Hi, dear friends, cultural creatives and seekers everywhere. I'm Bruce Lipton.
And I'm Shamini Jain.
And we want to welcome you to our special program, Become a Conscious Creator.
The science to co-creating a better future.
Well, this is a great opportunity for us to show you that we're not necessarily victims in a world that's getting out of control. We're actually creating this. And this is actually the foundation of science in the sense of both physics and biology and psychology as well. And we're here to really give you this new understanding to empower you.
Because the science is really clear, where we have been fed models of separation, even between mind, body, and now mind, body, and spirit. We simply know that the separation that we thought we had doesn't actually exist. Whether we're talking about this from our mind and body, or even between us, the science is showing us how deeply connected we are, not just even with our own spirit and creative process, but with each other. And we're so excited to start exploring with you all of the ways that you can begin to co-create the future that you've always wanted for yourself and for others.
Really love to give you the insight and the information that manifests what a lot of people experience called the honeymoon effect. The honeymoon effect, an opportunity of living heaven on earth. Well, that's not just exclusive just for a short period of time. You can have a honeymoon effect your whole life and recognize the planet isn't as scary as it looks. It's a garden, it's beautiful, and we're the creators in that garden.
And how do we foster that creative flow within ourselves? Well, first, we're going to dispel some myths about separation and recognize how powerful we are as creative beings. But then we're also going to get into some really fun practices on how we begin to feel that creative force within us so that we can really align with it, enjoy it, and allow it to kind of guide us through the process of co-creating a better future.
So let's understand this. The whole idea of that new agey stuff is not actually just an idea. It's actually based in real hard science. And this is what we want to offer you, the science of the coming world that we're involved with.
Because once we take that science and we put it into practice, we literally will create the flourishing future that we have always dreamed of. I'm so excited for you guys to join us.
And so am I, because we have such wonderful information to share with you. Well, it's so wonderful that Shamini and I have this opportunity to talk to you. And we just want to really back it up with an understanding of who we are and where we came from. So just as a very slight introduction, let me just say I received my PhD in developmental biology at the University of Virginia, did a postdoc at the University of Texas, and ended up being a professor at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine in the Department of Anatomy. And through all of this work, I had an opportunity to culture stem cells. My research was on cloning cells. And from that research, I acquired a much better understanding of the nature of biology as compared to what I was teaching the medical students at the time. So it was very important to recognize that the new biology has a really different curriculum base than the conventional biology that medical students get. So this is where I'm coming from as a research scientist yet, and I'm so happy and fortunate because my dear partner Shamini also has a very distinguished career here. And Shamini, you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely, Bruce. Thank you so much. So I started off my work in clinical neuroscience, actually, cognitive neuroscience, at one of the finest institutions in the U.S., Columbia University, and that's where I did my undergraduate work in neuroscience and behavior. And even then, and I'm dating myself here, which I love. This was in the 90s, Bruce, in the early 90s, actually, and they were telling us that the brain didn't change after age 7. Which even as a young undergraduate, I really wondered about, because I also came from a very deep spiritual background, which we'll get into later. But I began to wonder, maybe there's more than just the brain. We had this huge fascination with the brain, and it was wonderful. At those times, we were looking at how the brain lit up when we did this or did that, but was there more? And I found myself deeply interested in healing. So I ended up doing my PhD work at the University of California, San Diego, in clinical psychology and an area of research known as psychoneuroimmunology. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's a relatively new field, about 50 years old. I'll be sharing more about it during our course. Bruce, as you know, in addition to being a scientist and having spent many decades studying things like the biofield and psychoneuroimmunology, I'm also a singer, right? And have loved to sing my whole life. And I know many of you probably have an art form that you love that maybe you're still doing or you're not doing, but you might miss. One of my inspirations generally for my life has been a Vedic goddess, and her name is Saraswati. And I wanted to raise her for a moment because not only is she a huge inspiration for me, but as I was moving around in what seemed like a very disconnected world where it almost seemed like the creative process was one thing and the scientific process was another. Well, we know that that's not really true. And when we look at the embodiment of Saraswati as just one of the incarnations of the divine feminine, there are so many across many cultures that each of you may align with. When I look at her, I'm struck by the fact that she always held the wisdom behind all traditions, both creative and scientific. So you see that she holds a veena, which is an ancient instrument, musical instrument. She holds a book for knowledge. And she also holds the promise of spiritual liberation. She has a rosary. She reminds us that the creative and scientific sides are not separate at all, but one and the same. And we're going to be touching upon that in this course as we start really exploring our creative juice, our creative process as a way to ignite the flourishing within us and between us. And we'll be doing some of that work with sound, which of course Saraswati is very much known for too. So I'm excited about that.
Well, really exciting for us to be here because this new biology changes our understanding of the world, the knowledge that it offers. And in fact, you might be very, very familiar with an age-old understanding that knowledge is power. And while people understand that, it's easier to maybe look at it this way, that a lack of knowledge is a lack of power. And then when you understand that, then I say, then any misperceptions that you hold about life actually represent a lack of knowledge. And through the sessions that I want to talk about, I want to give you the new knowledge. And there are two very fundamental misperceptions that the world has been programmed with that are completely wrong, and they take our power away. And the exciting idea is that we have a new renaissance in science, a renaissance where new information is coming in and challenging old beliefs that we used to teach for years and years. So, for example, there's a misperception that people have that biological processes employ Newtonian physics, and you go, oh my God, now what does that mean? Well, let me just make a simple explanation. With Newtonian physics, the universe was divided into two realms, a material physical realm and an invisible energetic realm. So we have two different realms. But according to the physics, the principles of that physics is that energy doesn't affect matter and matter doesn't necessarily affect energy. They're separate realms. So as a result, we look at the body as physical matter, and if we want to work with the body in medical schools, we understand that how do you work with a physical body? You use physical things such as surgery or pharmaceutical drugs. And this is how we treat a physical entity. However, in 1927, a new physics evolved, a new physics called quantum physics. And I just want to assure you a very important fact, that quantum physics is the most valid of all the sciences on planet Earth. The significance is this, that all the theoretical ideas that preceded the discoveries, almost every one of those theoretical ideas has now been proven to be true. So in that sense, there was a deep understanding of the new physics back in 1927. And back in that 1927 date, it was understood that the universe is not made out of two realms. It's actually one realm. Everything is energy. Well, of course, now as you're sitting there looking around your world, sitting on a seat, seeing everything that's physical in your room, this is going to be a very difficult insight at this moment because actually, there is no such thing as matter. And we're going to go into that because obviously that is a very difficult thing to take into your life and go, really? I'm in a physical world? I say, no, you're in an energy world. And the significance of this was back even in 1927. Quantum physicists understood as one of the first principles of quantum physics that consciousness is what is creating our life experiences. It's our mind and our thoughts that are creating the world. Well, important understanding of that is, well, if it's our mind and our thoughts, then we're the ones that can change our mind, change our thoughts, and change our perception of the world. I go, precisely. It takes us from being what we might consider victims of a world out of control into a world where we actually have an input to manifest what we are wishing for and what we're desiring. And this is what this whole program is about, is to return that power to you, the ability to manifest and create your life. So The big misperception that we're going to start with and understand is the nature that everything is energy, and your mind is the source of energy that will control those life experiences. And there's a second misperception that has profoundly disempowered us, and that is the perception that genes control our lives. And I go, well, why should that be disempowering? And the answer is, well, as far as we know, we didn't pick the genes we came with. And if we don't like our characteristics, we can't change those genes. And then add on top of that, the belief that genes turn on and off all by themselves. I go, if you put all that together, I say, what is the meaning behind this idea that genes control biology? I say, total disempowerment. Because now we perceive we are victims of our heredity and that we can't do anything about it. There's something running in our family, whether it's heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and it's running in the family. We perceive that we're going to just be victims of genes that are going to manifest that in our life. Well, we're going to put a lot of sessions into this understanding, because when you understand who you are and how you really work, because the idea of genetics has now been found, that idea of genetics programming us has now been found to be totally false. I'll give you a simple reason. Genes cannot turn on and off. Genes are blueprints. And I go, what's the relevance of that? And I go, well, go into an architect's office and she's working on a blueprint and ask her if her blueprint is on or off. She'll look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean, on and off? It's a blueprint. There's no on and off. And I go, precisely. A blueprint, that's what a gene is, a blueprint to make the proteins of the body. What's relevant is it takes an architect to read those blueprints. And now we know in biology, that architect is your mind. How you see the world adjust your genetics. This is the new science that we'll emphasize, called epigenetics. And you go, epigenetics? I go, yeah, you've been programmed with the idea of genetics. I say, what does that represent? Well, the idea of that is genes control our life. And I go, well, that's where the victim comes in. But I say, wait, the new science is called epigenetics. And I go, well, what does that mean? Well, epi means above. So, matter of fact, what do we call skin? Epidermis. I said, what does that translate as? I say, the dermis is just below the skin. And so epidermis, epi means above. So the skin is epidermis above the dermis. Well, now let's use it in the context of the new genetics called epigenetics. And I go, what does that mean? It means that the control is not in the gene, the control is epi, above the genes. And that's where we start to understand the nature of our consciousness, our mind, our developmental programming, our belief issues. Why? Because those are the characters that define our genetic activity. And just to close with this little brief introduction of where we're going to go, let me just give you a very important fact, and that is this. Less than 1% of disease is connected to genes. Well, that should stop you for a second and say, then where is 99% of disease coming from? And the answer is environment and consciousness. And if you understand this, then you don't have to be a victim of a disease. You can be the master of your health. And I'm so excited about all this, of course, because this new science revolutionizes the idea of who we are. We're very powerful creators in this world. Yet to understand that creation really requires an insight into the psychology. Where is the psychology? How does your thought and mind influence all this? Well, that's why I'm so honored to have my dear friend Shamini here, because that's her expertise. So I'll add that fundamental biology, and Shamini's going to add that fundamental psychology. And together, with this information, you'll really learn how powerful you are in creating the life you want.
It's so beautifully put, Bruce. Thank you so much. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that the first step is for us to recognize the misperceptions that have been put on us, just like going to Columbia University and being told the brain doesn't change until age 7, and then learning, oh, we were wrong about that. Turns out we were wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah.
So the first thing we have to do is clarify what is actually valid and what is actually true and what the science is actually showing us. And you do such a masterful job of that. I'm so excited for you to be sharing about
But
the
I wouldn't
reality.
be here without this masterful job, because Shamini has deep insight into the nature nature of the psychology and the thoughts and how they influence our biology and our fate. So together, I'm so excited to be with her. And I'm going to let you give a little insight of what you might talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So psychoneuroimmunology, psyche meaning spirit, really. Sometimes we say the mind, right? In the Western world, we tend to conflate psyche with the mind, but we're going to be going all the way into our spiritual practices. I will be sharing with you, of course, the reality of the science, talking about epigenetics. What influences the turning on and off of those genes? How do we actually influence that with our environment? What does the science say from psychoneuroimmunology? How does our environment play a role? Our emotions play a role, of course, our stress. So these are fundamental things that we learn from psychoneuroimmunology. And they really have to do with the mind, the processing of emotions, working through old patterns and traumas. And we'll be working with some of that for sure. We'll also be exploring the science of the biofield and really deeply understanding what we know about the science of how we can connect all the way vibrationally, both within ourselves and between each other to foster healing. The data is really real and amazing. And there's just some incredible work coming out that I can't wait to share with you. But beyond that, of course, we're going to be fortifying ourselves with the actual new, so-called new science, which really stems from indigenous wisdom. Much of it, we'll be touching on that. It's time for us to put this into practice, right? It's time for us to not only fortify ourselves with this knowledge, but say, how am I going to take this and bring it out into the world so that I can lead the flourishing life that I know I'm meant to lead, so that I can fulfill my heart's desires and wishes, both for myself, for my loved ones, and for the world. Because once we really take in the data, we recognize how powerful we are, and then it's about what steps do I take next? How can I really integrate that into my daily practice? So we're definitely diving into the science, but we're also going to get into really key, fun, and practical ways that we can foster flourishing for ourselves and for the planet. And I'm just so excited about this. Because truly, we are conscious creators, right? And it's time for us to come into our conscious creatorship to develop the world that we want for our children and our children's children and even ourselves.
And it's time for this change right now, because whether you're surfing the web or watching the news or even looking out your window, you can see the planet is in a state of chaos. And this chaos is actually due to one major thing that's not even being discussed in the news even, and that is we're facing an extinction. Human behavior has undermined the web of life so much that we've collapsing this web of life, and people don't recognize we're not separate from nature. We are nature. If nature goes down, humans go down. So as you look around, you see the chaos going on. The question is, do you have to be involved in that chaos, or as a creator, can you step outside of that chaos and create a world that you want to be in, a world that is manifesting your wishes and your desires? And again, this is where the understanding of from the genes from the bottom, but through Shamini's work and in addition to other work that I have, we start to understand the nature of the difference between what is called the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. People are so not really clear of the difference and how profoundly important these minds are. Because with the knowledge of how they work, then you have the knowledge to take that mind and create what Shamini was just talking about, a world that we can thrive into.
It's so well put. So we can kind of understand it up here. It all makes sense conceptually, but then there's an inner part of us from childhood, from things that we've experienced that kind of creates a set point in us sometimes that we may not even be aware of. And sometimes we call that the subconscious. There's so many levels of this, right? So how do we tap into that and make sure that we're really aligning our energy and our spirit in a way that we're not being led by these subconscious programs, as Bruce likes to call them, right? This is really important. So we will be touching on traumatic patterns, even the relationship of trauma with epigenetics, and the ancient understanding of karmic vibrations and karmic patterns and how those are related. Because when we do that, we empower ourselves to recognize the program, recognize where it comes from, and then work with it so that it no longer holds us in a frozen reality, which is very narrow in scope. So then we get to broaden our perspective and broaden the possibilities for flourishing as a result. That's going to be some of the fun, deep work that we're going to do.
Yeah, and it really takes into consideration stuff you've heard about, but you didn't really fully understand. For example, you're familiar with something called the placebo effect. And I go, what is that? And I say, well, this person's very sick with some issue, and the doctor comes up and says, oh, look, here's the greatest pill, the newest pill, it just came out just for your issue. That person then takes those pills and gets better, but then later finds out the pills were sugar pills. The significance of that understanding is then what healed the patient. It obviously wasn't the sugar pill. It was the belief in the sugar pill. And this is what we're going to emphasize, how those beliefs are created, and we're going to give some insight on how you can change those beliefs so that you can change the character and quality of your life, because this is the source. And the idea of the placebo effect is, yes, does mind control us? And the answer is, well, that's the placebo effect. It's all done through consciousness.
All through consciousness. And when we dive into the work behind placebo, we learn about all the different facets of placebo that we can actually use to foster our own healing. Now, you know, Bruce, I'm fond of saying placebo equals heal, because we see placebo effects in everything. We see it in modern medicine, allopathic medicine, with drugs, with surgery, but also with things like acupuncture and, you know, even energy healing to some degree. Why? Well, because placebo is actually our consciousness. And when we dive into the data behind it, we see that we can foster these powerful healing effects, holistic elements that activate life force, or healing effects, by setting up our rituals appropriately, by recognizing how our relationships play a role in healing, and how we can manage our expectations and even our environment to foster that powerful healing. That's what placebo is actually telling us. It's all about our own creative power.
But we also have to emphasize this fact, because when everyone talks about placebo and they go, yes, I can see how powerful it is in helping our health, people don't also recognize this, that the placebo is a result of positive thinking. And no one's really talking about what is the consequence of negative thinking. I go, this becomes very critical, because it's equally powerful to positive thinking, but it works in the opposite direction. Yeah. Well, placebo can heal you of any disease that we know on this planet. The idea of negative thinking, which is called nocebo, can cause any disease. It can even have people die from a negative belief. And this is where we have to start recognizing the role and the power of that consciousness, be it positive or negative belief systems.
And you might ask, well, I don't want to have a nocebo effect. How do I make sure I don't have a nocebo effect? We're going to address that, and we'll address why it seems that nocebo effects are so powerful. What's going on in the brain that, you know, makes some of us more primed to nocebo effects, and how can we deal with those so that we don't get frozen by the onslaught of bad news or fear tactics, or even just our own fears. We're human. Sometimes we have fear, but how do we overcome that fear? How do we make sure we minimize those effects?
So the beautiful part of our collaboration on this, and we so appreciate you being here, because we're here to empower you. We want you to have the power over your creation. We don't want your life to be a whole bunch of random type accidents. It's not random. We are creators. You are a powerful creator. And when Shamini and I offer this information, that's the knowledge, and the knowledge is power.